My name's Roger DiSilvestro. My book is Theodore Roosevelt in the Badlands, a young politician's quest for recovery in the American West. And this book looks at an early stage in Roosevelt's life when he was only in his 20s, and he was a rising star in the New York Assembly. He was building a statewide reputation as a politician in the state of New York. And on February 12th of 1884, his wife gave birth to their first baby. And 2 days later, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, both his wife and his mother died in the same house within hours of one another. And Roosevelt, of course, was crushed by this, and he gave up his political career, and he went to live on a ranch in Dakota Territory in what is now North Dakota. No book has focused on Roosevelt's ranching years, on that particular period, and I think it's an emotionally significant period in his life because of this double tragedy that he went through. And so oftentimes this is just giving passing reference in other books on Roosevelt. He was seeing both wildlife disappear and wildlife habitat disappear, which became very important to him, especially after his first son was born, and he wanted to take him hunting, and he began to sense that there wouldn't be anything to hunt. This was a big deal for Roosevelt. You know, hunting was something he'd been doing since childhood. And so he came back from the ranch in 1887, and he founded the Boone and Crockett Club in early 1888 to work for the protection of habitat and wildlife. People who knew him from the earlier days scarcely recognized him because he'd become so much, he was more muscular and much healthier. And even his tone of voice had changed from sort of a high-pitched, wheedling voice to a much stronger voice as he had this recovery. But he also, as time passed, he thought when he went off to the ranch that he would never recover emotionally. He said, my happiness is over, my days are over now that Alice, his wife, has died. And but within 2 years he made a very speedy recovery because he remarried. Roosevelt has been almost a lifelong interest for me because in the 1950s there was a comic book called Classics Illustrated, which took Shakespeare and Rudyard Kipling and so on and turned them into comic books. And they came out with a special edition on Theodore Roosevelt for his 100th birthday. It was this big 100-page comic book about his life, and that was my introduction to Theodore Roosevelt. In my teen years, I went to work on a ranch in the Nebraska Sandhills, which is a very kind of remote, not very well. The nearest town to the ranch I was on was 800 people, and it was 35 miles from the ranch, and it was all, at that time, dirt roads out to the ranch. And it was a cattle ranch, much like the one he was on. So before I went out to work on this ranch, I read his books on ranching, thinking that even though it was 80 years later, that he still probably had something to teach. So I've worked in Washington, D.C. now for, gosh, almost 30 years with conservation groups, and as an editor and writer, and it includes the National Audubon Society, Defenders of Wildlife. I'm presently at the National Wildlife Federation with National Wildlife magazine. And so for me, I managed to marry my interest in wildlife with my interest in writing and pursue a career in conservation.